You are listening to 600 Saga. Today's feature is Just a Button by Mariah Avix. Read by Mariah Avix. Just a button. I brushed off snow and shook my bright orange coat, sighing at the new streak of dirt. Grandma gave me a hug before I could even get it off. She grabbed the front of my coat and twisted me from side to side. I was clumsy. I fell on the way in. I looked down at the dirt. It would need dry cleaning and a new button. I poked at the half of the tortoiseshell button still attached. Grandma frowned at the button and pulled my coat from me and wandered off with it. I passed the crushed fruit tray to my cousin and followed Grandma. By the time I'd hugged everyone and said my hellos, she was already digging out her button box. "You don't have to do this now." I sat down on the chair in the sewing room. "Nonsense! You can't go back outside with this. What happens when you fall again and stab yourself with it?" She dumped out the box. I started to look for something like the faux tortoiseshell glass. "It's okay. I can just get something and maybe rearrange the buttons later." I wasn't really sure what to do. I loved the coat. I loved the buttons. It made winter so much less crummy. And now it was dirty and damaged and just what I needed this week. "I have just the button you need." The button was from my father. "It is about time it gets a new life. It deserves to see the world as it is today." She was grabbing buttons and tossing them back into the box. "It's just a button, Grandma." I spied 2 dull brass buttons and set them aside. Maybe if I couldn't find a replacement, I could do a couple of brass alternating with the tortoiseshell. "Yours was just a button. This isn't just a button." Her hands shook a little as she slid several tabs with small white shirt buttons into the box. "This button has a little something extra. My father was wearing it when he met my mother. He said he got it from an old woman when he helped her find shelter during a raid." I'd never heard my grandma talk about her father, so I kept quiet while sorting buttons. "I don't remember where he was anymore. He was separated from his troop and trying to get through a town. I think he said there was an air raid. He saw an old woman wandering around lost. The town had been abandoned, so he broke into one of the homes." She stopped and held up a flat, black button. It looked nothing like my glinting button. She tilted it in the light and held another button next to it, then tossed both in the box. There were grenades and guns and whatever else abandoned everywhere, so he wanted to make sure she'd be safe. He couldn't understand much of what she said, but when they got into a house, she just sat down, like she knew exactly where she was. She slid 3 turquoise buttons together and left them to the side. He said she pulled out a funny-looking bag and dumped sand on the table. He had to search the house to make sure it was safe. When he came back, the sand was spread thin in front of her and looked like a liquid. He said he saw something in the sand, where his troop was. She picked up a button and grinned. It looked like a black square. Not at all like my button. Not even like a button. He told me the woman had traveled through time. Well, at first he said she was a witch, when I was little. But when I was old, and I was by his bed, wearing a coat with a button, he recognized it. He said that maybe her magic was just technology we didn't have yet. She smiled at the memory, and her fingers curled around a coat lapel that wasn't there. She told him about how the war ended, the bombs, the things that are written in history books. She grabbed a scissors and snipped the last of the broken button off the coat. He had been wearing a coat and was missing a button, so she grabbed something, He thought it was a bit of sand, but it was a button. The old woman held it up to his coat and did something, and it attached where he'd lost his button. She tossed the scrap of my button into the trash and pressed the flat square against my orange coat. I wasn't quite sure what to make of the story. It seemed like crazy ramblings. But as I watched, the button was now a perfectly matching tortoise shell. When I was 11, and I was getting ready for your great-aunt Catherine's wedding, I was wearing my good pea coat. I broke a button. Mom and all my sisters were helping Catherine into her dress. Dad took the button and just plucked it off his coat and pressed it against the fabric, and it stayed. Just like this. I moved it from coat to coat for years. I forgot how special it was. It was just my fancy button. She held up the coat and shook it. Some sand fell to the floor. I couldn't tell which button was different. I think maybe it's time for you to have a little more special in your life. I heard the calls to come and eat. She handed me the coat. I'll let you hang it up in the front hall. I'm going to get some ham. I took the coat and hugged her. She headed into the dining room and I walked to the front hall. I hung the coat with my scarf and brushed my hand down the front of it. I looked for the dirt, twisting the coat, and couldn't find any. I brushed my hand over the coat. The orange color seemed brighter. An old wine stain on the cuff was gone. There was a bit of sand on the front. I brushed it off, but the sand seemed to get sucked into one of the buttons. This was Just a Button by Mariah Avix. More work can be found at insomniacs.com. Check our show notes for links. Music is provided by Mads. Learn more about 600 Second Saga, our authors, how to submit your flash fiction, and how to support the podcast in the show notes. This has been Mariah Avix and 600 Second Saga.